to this week's episode of the Inclusive Networker podcast. This is your host, Dr. Ramona, and who are we calling into conversation today? Well, it is Dr. Nika White. I am so very excited to have Dr. White as my guest. And let me tell you a little bit about her. You all know that I love to tell you the fabulous information about our guests. And Dr. White is one of those people that has so much rich information to give our inclusive networker community. So here she is. Dr. Nika White is a national authority and fearless advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. As an award-winning management and leadership consultant, keynote speaker, published author, and executive practitioner for DEI efforts across business, government, nonprofit, and education, Dr. White helps organizations break barriers and integrate DEI into their business frameworks. Her work has led to her designation by Forbes as a top 10 D&I Trailblazer. She is the founder of Nika White Consulting, where her firm works with organizations to identify and implement opportunities to embed DEI throughout its operations and culture. Nika White Consulting is a diversity, equity, and inclusion boutique consulting firm with recognized authority on strategic diversity, intentional inclusion, and organizational effectiveness. Dr. White believes that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not just a check mark for good business, it is a way to transform the world. Over her 20 plus years of leadership, Dr. White has worked with over 200 corporate, educational, government, and nonprofit brands, managed over $200 million in business assets for her clients, and written 2 books on diversity, equity, and inclusion, including The Intentional Inclusionist and Next Level Inclusionist, transforming your work and yourself for diversity, equity, and inclusion success. Dr. White's third book, Inclusion Uncomplicated, a transformative guide to simplify DEI, in partnership with Forbes Books, is scheduled to release in January, and we are past January, so it is out. I have read it. It is so good. You all are going to absolutely love it. Dr. White has presented over 200 keynote speeches and presentations across the country on issues such as team engagement, organizational leadership, strategic diversity, race equity, and intentional inclusion. Dr. White's talks bring a mixture of expertise, passion, vision, and authentic style to create holistic takeaways for audiences. The heart of Dr. White's work addresses the ability to create transformative environments with intentionality around inclusion. She helps create professional spaces where people can collaborate through a lens of compassion, empathy, and understanding. So welcome, Dr. Nika White to the Inclusion Networker community. I'm so excited to have you.
I am feeling the excitement, and I am equally excited. I'm going to try to match your effort, Dr. Ramona, but thank you so much for having me on the Inclusive Networker. I'm really thrilled and cannot wait to be in conversation with you.
Yes, we have been working to get this down and into this space and into this community. So it is so good to have you. And so let's just jump right in. And so normally the question that I ask my guests first is, what is your lens? And I'm going to read something. We're jumping right into Inclusion Uncomplicated because I'm so excited about this book. We are going to talk about it throughout this entire podcast. So here's one thing that you said about your lens, and I love this because it is so akin to my own lens. And so you said, on one hand, it is my lived experience as a multi-generational minority within a dominant culture that systematically disadvantages people like me. On the other hand, it is within that same dominant system that I became an educated global expert. And I love that because it's both and, right? Yeah. We can be on both sides of it. We can hear from both sides of the coin, right? And so I love your lens. So tell me a little bit more about it.
Well, thank you so much for this question. I do believe in holding the middle, right? I believe in the both and. I
Mm-hmm.
think there's so much nuance around the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and sometimes we don't allow ourselves to lean into that, right? And so for me, I think that part of helping to be a bridge builder is to be able to hold the middle, to recognize what those nuances are, and to realize that we all have something to contribute based upon our lens. For me, my lens is very intersectional. I am a Black woman. I am a mother of a neurodivergent son. I am a mother of an activist daughter who is, the apple doesn't fall from the tree. I am an entrepreneur. So all of these things that have made up who I am and certainly has shaped my lens and how I show up to the world, how in which I like to approach this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I wanted my readers to recognize that at the onset. And what I'm challenging them to do is to also think about, what is your lens and how are you showing up to this exercise of learning through this tool, this book, Inclusion Uncomplicated.
Yeah, so that is a perfect segue into the rest of the conversation. So, inclusion uncomplicated. How do we get here? How did you start the process
Yes.
of getting to this space and this type of book? Because we have a lot of DEI information out there.
Yeah.
So, why inclusion uncomplicated?
Yeah. I love this question. I have come to recognize that as a practitioner in this space, there are a number of barriers for people to really engage effectively and to endure the process of realizing impact, meaningful impact. And as I've been working with different organizations and different organizational leaders, one of the things that was really reoccurring for me, that was a stumbling block for many of those leaders, was that the work felt so daunting. It almost felt unattainable, inaccessible. And I realized that that is a huge barrier, because if we feel a sense of reluctance, if we feel resistance, then we are not going to be committed to this process. And so while DEI certainly is complex, because the constructs of DEI are very complex, it doesn't have to always mean that it's impossible. So what I want to do is to help make the work of DEI a bit more practical for people. And I think that part of doing that is to help to uncomplicate the work, right? Give people this information in bite-sized pieces that they can digest, allow them to be on a journey where they can experience different cultures, different insights, and then let that learning journey lead them to a sense of confidence that allows them to stay the course. I don't want people to jump the ship. I don't want people to sit on the sidelines. And I think that if we can try to take away some of the complexity of it, then that's going to help us be able to get more people involved, engaged, and ultimately for us to be able to, what I talk about in the book is unravel the knot that binds humanity together. So that's what this is. We want to uncomplicate DEI, help people to unravel the knot where it looks really complicated and it looks like frayed and all knotted up, and to help them to settle into this work is attainable. And it starts with each of us believing that, having that in our mindset, and then actualizing results through the way in which we're showing up to the world and to all of those who which we have an influence over.
And I love that you talk throughout the entire book about this mindset shift, right?
Yes. Yes. It is a
Go ahead.
mindset shift. I think that's
Yeah.
a big part of the battle for people, right? Whatever, a man thinketh, so is he. So if we're going to continue to, play back and forth into our heads that this work is complicated, it's not attainable, we can't do it, we're going to be defeated even before we take the first step. And so I really think that that is part of how in which we need to be coaching people who are really wanting to be effective and being a part of this work. And so it's all about, the metaphor that I use throughout the book is unraveling the yarn, right? Unraveling the knot, just being able to pull it apart piece by piece, not feeling like we have to boil the ocean overnight or solve things, immediately. But how can we start very strategically implementing steps that will incrementally over time allow us to be able to see the results that our society deserves, that all people deserve, and just to make us better and stronger.
Yeah, and with that mindset, you talked about this idea of being intentional,
Oh,
right?
yes.
And
Yes. That's one of my
and so
favorite
this,
words, Dr. Ramona.
yes, I love it. I love it. I love it because, we often talk to people, and I often talk to people about, we need to speak up for people. We need to talk about DEI.
Yeah.
But then I found that sometimes people can't speak up for themselves. And
Yes,
so,
right.
how are we
Right.
expecting them to speak up for others? And so, when we think about this idea of intentionality, this idea of fear comes up with a lot of
Yes.
people. And so, they're thinking, I want to do this, but I'm scared, I'm fearful. And I love something that you said is that part of that fear comes from lack of clarity, right? That's why
Yes.
people aren't acting.
Yes.
And passivity perpetuates the problem.
Yes. Lack of
Yes.
clarity leads to resistance. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's the reason why I want to make sure that through this book, I can provide that clarity that people need, that's keeping them on the sidelines, or that's keeping them
Mm-hmm.
in a place of feeling like we can't attain an equitable society. And, the demystification of these constructs of DEI becomes really important. So I was very intentional about it. I believe in
Mm-hmm.
intentionality. I think that being intentional is one of those separators of leaders and organizations that are able to sustain the impactful work of DEI. And being intentional has a certain look about it. It's not passive at
Mm-hmm.
all. We can't be passive about this work of inclusion. We have to be very
Mm-hmm.
strategic, and we have to be very calibrated, very calculated, very much action oriented. We have to believe that the process and the journey that we're on is going to produce a result that benefits us, not just some of us, but
Mm-hmm.
benefits all of us. And so I'm really big on that piece of intentionality. It was actually the title of my first book, as you mentioned, when you were sharing a little bit
Mm-hmm.
about me. It's Intentional Inclusionist, right? And it's all about helping people to grow within their mindset of how can I really take an intentional approach to influencing all of those that are in my circle and that are in my network, and not necessarily waiting for someone else to own this
Mm-hmm.
work. Because the truth is, this work belongs to all of us, not the people that carry the title of Chief Diversity Officer, Manager, Director, or even the HR professionals. It belongs to all of us, and we do have ability to help create and influence that change.
Mm-hmm. And I love what you said about intentionality has a look. There's
It
something that
does.
is supposed to happen, right? So a large majority of the inclusive networker community are network marketers, right? And so when we think about this idea of going out into communities, how you're marketing, how you're connecting with diverse communities, give us some things. How does it look? What does it look like
Yeah.
when we're intentional, when we're doing
Yes.
that?
Well, there's not a one size fits all. And I think that sometimes
Mm-hmm.
when we are networking, especially from a marketing perspective, and we're really trying to create a message that resonates with everyone, that's not always possible. So we have to know our audience. We have to know what are their pain points. What are they going to resonate with? What aligns with them? What are the curiosities that they're holding? And then make sure that as we are showing up to those conversations, to those meetings and convenings, that we are doing so with those needs in mind. And I think that sometimes what happens is we will approach those situations with there's only one way. And that's a lazy approach, I believe. I think that we need to
Mm-hmm.
get out of our comfort zone, and we need to spend some time on the front end understanding more about the culture, the differences. I say that the best way to become an effective ally is to get proximate to the lived experiences of those in which you're allying for and with.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that you can't just be on the sidelines thinking that you know what they need and then providing that handout, because that support may not be what they need. And in fact, it could have an adverse effect, right? So we have to ask questions. We have to get beneath the surface, right? And just really drive towards that level of intentionality of learning as much as we can so that we can be effective in whatever type of work and engagements that we are attempting to endeavor.
And that is so, this is something that I've talked about in engagement, that engagement actually can have an adverse effect. And people don't think about that. We think of it as this is something that's great that we're doing, we're going out, we're saving the world, but then we don't think about, okay, how are we dividing communities? How are we sometimes going out into communities and we're, just taking from them and
Yeah.
then causing harm because we don't give them feedback. We don't leave anything with them. We don't help to build any kind of capacity. So I think that's so important for people to think about, is how do we really ensure that we're not engaging in a way that causes harm? That's so counterintuitive, right? To
Yes.
most people.
And it happens daily. That's the sad part of it. And it
Yeah.
happens daily, not because people are intentionally trying to create that harm. It is because they aren't taking the time to, on the front end, learn, relearn, unlearn, right? All of that is part of this journey of, being an effective ally. And even the simplicity of asking questions like, what does support look like for you in this moment, can be very effective, instead of just assuming that we know what people need. So I am a big advocate of, just really getting proximate again to people's problems and experiences and learning as much as we can, and not trying to do for, but trying to do with. That's important. If we're advocating for certain groups, particularly those marginalized communities, we need to do it in collaboration with them, right? Otherwise, it does come across as very performative, as, I'm being the savior here to save the day. And that's more looking inward than it is looking outward.
And we're often thinking about what are all the things that we need to learn. But sometimes, like you just said, the focus is what do we need to unlearn right
Yes.
now, right?
Yes. When I
Yeah.
facilitate a lot of my sessions, Dr. Ramona, part of the objective in the instructional design is how can I also help people to unlearn the misinformation that they're holding on to? That is so important, because I truly believe that if we were to think about some of the issues that create the divide in our society, particularly around issues of inclusion and equity, it is because of just a lack of understanding, not because someone has made a firm decision that I'm going to speak against humanity. I'm going to, stay in this place of oppression and prejudice against certain groups and populations. It's often because we don't know what we don't know. Now, that doesn't exonerate us, though, from the consequences of our actions, but it does help provide context and perspective that I think is important as we're trying to solve for humanity and greater level of cohesion among all different types of people, right? And seeing those differences as strength and as opportunity, right? That's important.
Yes, I love that. And I love the story of how you got into DEI, because you talked about how, you were at this, you were doing marketing and
Yep.
you noticed there was an issue, and
Yes.
you went to your boss and he's like, okay, your job now.
Now
And
you're going to do
so,
it. I hear you.
yeah,
I'm with you. Now
yeah,
you're going to do it. Tell me how. Yeah, I shared
uh-huh.
that story in the book, and I actually share it a lot, even when I have the privilege of going and speaking to different groups, because one, it helps to showcase that any one of us, regardless of our background, what discipline we're in, our experience, any one of us can find a way to be intimately involved in an intentional way of helping to create belonging and inclusion and equity, right? And I think so many of us sit on the sideline because, again, we see this as the work of someone else. And so I want people to own and have a sense of accountability. And it wasn't until I raised my hand that led me on this path of being directly involved in this space and this work. So that's important for me. I also want people to realize that there are a lot of business reasons, as well as moral imperative and humanity reasons, for us to engage in this work. In that particular situation, there was a direct correlation to the efficacy and performance of the organization that I was a part of, being able to reach its goal, being the most admired agency, attracting the best talent, and so there certainly are conversations where it's appropriate for the business case to find its way into the conversation, or I like to say the value proposition, but it also gives me a chance to amplify that it can't just be about the business case and about profit. It has to equally be about wanting to help ensure that everyone can show up at their best. And so it's not an either or, it is a both and. Again, that's holding the middle, right? And so I think that that's a really important story also of my history and my pathway into this work in this space. And I truly believe that it's now a part of who I am. It's a calling. It's not just my career. It really is purposeful work that I feel well suited to be in this space doing this work.
Yes, I love that. And we're so glad that you are here and doing such amazing things. And, one of the things that really struck me that you said in the book, and I think this is important, especially for businesses and teams, you said, don't confuse activity with impact.
Oh,
Come on,
yes.
talk about it.
Yes. It's so easy to do, especially once we get this hunger, we get this learning under our belt. We say, okay, now we're
Mm-hmm.
convinced, we're all in, we want to do it. And doing it for a lot of people just means any kind of movement, right? And it
Mm-hmm.
can be just any kind of activity. What I want to impress upon people is that there is a keen difference between activity and impact. And if we
Mm-hmm.
really want to peel back all the layers, get to the crux of the matter to create that sustainable change that is impactful, we have to make sure that we're looking deeper than just the surface. And the surface would be just a singular activity. Activity has a start and an end date. Impact is something that can be sustained. And when you think about trying to sustain impact, you have to look at systems, policies, procedures, culture, not just an individual Women's History Month event or Black History Month event, right? You have to think deeper than that. What are we doing to make sure we are recognizing through strategic initiatives and endeavors that we can really move the needle? And so I often challenge people to think in that and that in those terms, because otherwise we can find ourselves spinning our wheels, being very busy with busy work, activity
Mm-hmm.
that's not necessarily allowing us to move the needle and to create that change. And so that is something that I do speak a lot about in the book. And it tends to resonate with a lot of people because I know of a lot of
Mm-hmm.
organizations, let's create a DEI council. And then the DEI council becomes the special cultural event planning committee. And not to
Yes.
say that those events can't be impactful for helping people to build their cultural intelligence, particularly around difference, but it can't just end there. That's where I really
Mm-hmm.
believe, and we need a comprehensive strategic plan with intervention strategies and metrics of success and accountability mechanisms. It's all of those things that work in concert to allow us to be effective at moving the needle where true change is able to be sustained.
Mm-hmm. So, it's so many nuggets in here. You got some good stuff. Um, so this next part, okay. Um, Meeting people where they are.
Yes, yes.
So, okay, this is maybe some tough thing to hear, but you said meeting people where they are centers whiteness. Unpack that a little bit for us.
Okay. So when I say that meeting people where they are centers whiteness, what I'm trying to articulate there, and I do go into and expand upon this in the book, is that
Absolutely.
sometimes part of the crutch is, we have to slow walk this. People are just now
Mm-hmm.
entering into this conversation. Their learning journey has just started. They don't know what they don't know, and all of that is true. And notice I use and not but. We can't
Mm-hmm.
just leave them there. So what are we doing to help them to be on this journey and this pathway to where then the mindset shift is going to align with actualizing through specific leadership and action? And I use that word leadership intentionally because being inclusive, really practicing and leaning into equity, those are leadership competencies that I believe certainly should be expressed in that way, right? And so when I say that it's center whiteness, it is about how do we protect the comfort of the dominant culture. And oftentimes
Mm-hmm.
when those words are said, we have to meet people where they are. It is because of the desire and the need to try to protect white comfort, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have to interrogate those thoughts and challenge those thoughts. I do believe that we have to recognize that people are entering this work of DEI at different places within their learning journey. So meeting them where they are is a necessary step in this process, but it's not the step. It's not the destination. It's just the first baby step. Now, what are we
Mm-hmm.
doing to help nurture through those relationship building and through, providing resources and helping to lead them to resources that they're identifying for themselves to be able to bridge that gap? So I
Mm-hmm.
believe in, again, the both and. We do have to make sure we're paying attention to the different needs and the different entry points, but we can't leave people where they are. The whole point is to bring them to a place of greater maturity around cultural intelligence and humility
Mm-hmm.
around inclusivity and equity and belonging for all.
Yeah, and as you said, bringing people along, and I think there's something that's so interesting that you said as well, is that there is no finish line, and we
No,
often think that there's
none.
an end point. Like, we've been talking about this DEI stuff for years. It's
Yes.
over. Like, let's be done with it. And it's like, no,
I
there isn't a
know.
finish line. We all have work to
Exactly.
do, right?
Yes. One of my biggest pet peeves, Dr. Ramona, is when I get questions around when is enough enough? And it is
Mm-hmm.
because those individuals who are presenting those questions, while they may be well intended in terms of really just trying to gain some ground around understanding the nature and the complexity of DEI, what I'm hearing is, when can I stop? When can I
Mm,
stop giving attention to this? When can I stop
yeah.
investing in this? And you can't. And so, for those who have that mindset, they are already going to be at a deficit before taking that first step. And so, I like to make sure that
Wow.
I'm amplifying that. And I do think that people understanding that there are different degrees of intensity and layers to this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion is important, because then it puts us in this mindset of, even once I've reached a certain point within this journey, right, that feels like a big milestone, then I should certainly celebrate that, certainly recognize that, let that give you momentum and traction to go towards the next thing, to catapult
Mm-hmm.
yourselves to the next level. But there's always a new level in this work, and I don't want that to be missed. And so, questions like, when is enough enough, is something that I'm really passionate about addressing and helping to provide the clarity where it needs to, so that people are not misguided by there being a very specific destination for this work.
Mm-hmm. And that goes into what you said about seeing this as an opportunity and not an obligation,
Yes, yes.
right?
That mindset shift is so important. If we see it
Yeah.
as an obligation, let's think about how we view obligations sometimes. Sometimes we view
Mm-hmm.
obligations as, especially if we don't want to do it, like it's a burden, it's an inconvenience. People don't want to be
Mm-hmm.
burdens. They don't want to be an inconvenience. They want to be celebrated and seen as worthy of whatever type of effort and time and energy, right? They want to be able to
Mm-hmm.
contribute at a high level into those environments. And so I think that part of that mindset shift is to stop seeing diversity, equity, and inclusion, the work of it, as an obligation, but see it as an opportunity. And when we make that mind shift, then I think that it opens up the doors for our conversations to shift from questions like,
Mm-hmm.
which are obligatory questions, what can we do to help DEI out? DEI is suffering. How can we help it? We're obligated to help it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus, if we see it as an opportunity, what can DEI do, and the lens of DEI do, to help us be a stronger performing organization, a stronger
Mm-hmm.
performing team, a better society where we are in a sense of community and standing in solidarity and supporting each other, right? Not because of
Mm-hmm.
how you look, but because of humanity. And I think
Yeah.
that mindset shift is so important.
Mm-hmm. And that brings us again back to the business case too, right? Because
Yeah.
we're becoming a global marketplace, and we know
Yes,
that if we are not inclusive, we are not going to make it in the global marketplace. And
absolutely.
so, as we think about, also, businesses think about businessing, right? They
Business
want to
and
make money.
yeah.
They want to businesses
Yeah.
gone business, right? And so when we
Yes.
think about this business case, I love some of the things that you talked about with this. Like, there's changing demographics
Oh,
worldwide
yes.
and within
Uh-huh.
America. If we're
Right.
not on board, we're not gonna make it. Not
You're not
only
going to
in
have a
America,
workforce.
but we're not going to have a workforce, okay?
Mhm.
And especially with network marketing, we're not going to be able to reach those diverse communities because we
Yes.
don't have those differences in thought. We don't have the
Yep.
different people that are connecting
Yeah.
oftentimes with the community. Um, and I'm just going to read a couple of these off, and then you can just tell me which
Yeah.
ones you want to respond to. But and these are so akin to network marketing. Y'all, this is, you got to get this book. It's so good. Okay, increased generational mix and differences. Come on, this expectations of clients, customers, and team members. Right, societal and cultural shifts, growing multicultural identity categories, complex social issues,
Yes.
improve productivity through increased engagement. I mean, the list goes on and on and
All the
on. And
above.
so, yes,
Yeah.
all.
It is
and
all the
both.
above. I really can't pick out
Yeah.
one or two to kind of just hone in on
Yeah.
because they're all are so equally important. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
collectively, though, that list, what it should do is give leaders pause, particularly those who have not yet
Mm-hmm.
adopted this mindset that DEI is imperative and it has to be a part of our organizations. And as you think about all of those things that were part of, the business case or the value proposition, it really boils down to how do we want to separate ourselves and to create an optimized output? And we can't do that. When I think about even just the word belonging and how it's found its way into this broader conversation, and rightfully so, I often
Mm-hmm.
say that regardless of people's background and demographics, if they are showing up in a space where they're questioning whether or not they belong, that they are not bringing their A game. They're not showing up at their best. If they're questioning, do I belong here? Am I valued? Am I seen? Am I heard? Do I have full opportunity for success? They're not showing up at their best. And when we think about how we rely on our colleagues, our teammates, all of us to show up at our best so that we can collectively, our output can be of the best and be optimized, then we're missing out on so much opportunity. And so, again, it just goes back to the importance of, are we being strategic to talk about all of the value sets in a way that can appeal to a broad audience? And for me, I am very keenly aware that there's some practitioners who will not at all discuss business case. They're really opposed to that language. And I understand why, which is why you hear me going back and forth between business case and value proposition. I think when I say value proposition, it puts it more in the context of the broader value, not just to the bottom line profits, but also to the individuals. And that's important to me. I think it's a both and. I think that I want to be strategic and I want to lead with my intellect and my experience in order to be able to get to the outcome that I'm seeking. And the outcome I'm seeking is better engagement, better commitment. Some people, what they need to hear is, how is this now benefiting my organization in terms of the performance and the bottom line? I can answer that for you. I can answer that by talking about some of the elements that are very specifically related to the business case, but I can also bring to the conversation how it's impacting people individually, personally, and professionally. But then that is still aligns with the business case, because people are the ones who make up organizations. They're the ones who are leading organizations. They're the ones who are modeling the type of values that you want to be at the forefront of your organizations. And so they both work hand in hand. I don't feel like you can separate the two.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. White, this has been absolutely an amazing conversation. I know the inclusive networker community has absolutely been blessed by this. And so I want to make sure that people can plug in with you. Tell us where to get Inclusion Uncomplicated. How do we follow you? What's your next big thing? What do you want us to do to keep in touch with you?
Well, first, Dr. Ramona, thank you so much for allowing me to share with your audience and your community. I do hope that I have planted some seeds that will be well nurtured and that people are thinking intently about, what do I now do with this information? Because that's important to me. And so in terms of Inclusion Uncomplicated, again, this is published by Forbes Books. And so it is available right now in hardbook copy, Kindle, and an audiobook. And so, of course, Amazon is a great place to go to check it out. But you also can go and get the book anywhere where you like to purchase your books. I encourage people that want to learn more and to be connected with me to go to my website, which is simply nikawhite.com. And you can find all of our social media platforms that we are aligned with. And, we have a lot of courtesy resources that we make available at no cost. It's just a way for us to show up to the broader community of learners who want to deepen their understanding and knowledge of DEI. So encourage you all to take advantage of those opportunities. But I'm grateful to have been here in conversation with you today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you again. It was absolutely amazing. I love the conversation. So much richness in this, and I'm just so grateful to have you as a guest. So to everyone, thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Inclusive Networker. And thank you to my fabulous guest, Dr. Nika White. You will find her information in the show notes, and we will see you on the next episode of The Inclusive Networker. Bye.